Hello everyone. Before we start the video, I wanted to share my appreciation to all of you who have shown huge amounts of encouragement through the last few videos. It is a pleasure narrating for such a supportive audience. If you are new to the channel, I would encourage you to subscribe and join this growing community. Now let's begin. Covering the night shift at the petrol station had become a routine for me. I was a night owl, and the extra few dollars per hour made it worthwhile. Besides, I needed to save up for my big move out of state. So night after night, I manned the counter, serving the occasional late-night customer and passing the time with whatever distractions I could find. The store was quiet. The only sounds the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the refrigerated drinks. Rows of snacks and candies lined the shelves, their vibrant packaging contrasting with the otherwise sterile environment. Behind the counter, I had my phone propped up, playing Netflix to keep me company during the long, solitary hours. It was on one such night, with a late-night rerun of a sitcom playing on my phone, that I noticed her. A middle-aged woman with disheveled hair and torn clothes, standing outside by the fuel pumps. Her presence was unexpected. I hadn't heard the jingle of the bell above the door, signaling a new customer. She swayed back and forth, her eyes locked onto me with an eerie intensity. I greeted her with a polite nod and a friendly smile, but she didn't respond in kind. Instead, she smiled back at me, a smile that sent shivers down my spine. It was a smile devoid of warmth, one that seemed to stretch unnaturally across her face. And then, without warning, she burst into a fit of cackling laughter. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her, unsure of how to react. Her laughter grew louder and more manic with each passing second, and I felt a chill in the air that seemed to permeate the entire store. It was as if a storm had erupted within those sterile fluorescent lit walls. Before I could react, she sprinted towards the serving window, her eyes locked onto mine, her laughter still echoing in my ears. She pounded violently against the glass, her voice rising into a frenzied yell. "Let me in! Let me in!" she screamed, her voice a discordant symphony of terror. "They're coming. You have to let me in." I stumbled back from the window, my heart racing, unsure of what to do. I glanced at the phone on the counter, but my trembling hands fumbled with the controls. The woman continued to pound on the glass, her frantic pleas growing more desperate. "They're right behind me. Please, you have to help me." I backed away further, my mind racing, torn between fear and disbelief. Who were they, and what had driven this woman to such a state of madness? My phone slipped from my grasp, its screen shattering on the floor as my attention remained fixed on the woman at the window. And then, as suddenly as she had arrived, she turned and fled, disappearing into the night. I stood there, my chest heaving, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The police arrived shortly after, taking my statement and examining the shattered phone. They promised to keep an eye out for the woman, but warned me to be cautious. As they left, I was left alone once more, the store's sterile environment now tainted by the memory of that haunting encounter. I never did find out who they were or what had driven the woman to such madness. But that night, as I continued my night shift, I couldn't help but glance nervously at the serving window, half expecting to see her return, her manic laughter echoing in the empty store. Working the night shift at the petrol station was a lonely gig, but it paid the bills, and that was enough for me. Most nights were quiet, with the only excitement being the occasional late-night customer grabbing a snack or filling up their tank. But one night, as the clock ticked closer to midnight, things took a turn for the eerie. I was restocking the shelves when I heard it, a faint whispering coming from one of the darkened corners of the store. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, the hushed voices growing louder and more distinct. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the whispers to the far end of the store, where the public restrooms were located. The door to the men's restroom was slightly ajar, and the whispers seemed to be emanating from within. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. What lay ahead, I wasn't sure. I didn't hear anyone enter the store. Pushing the door open slowly, I was greeted by a sight that sent a chill down my spine. A group of people, all dressed in tattered clothing, were huddled in the restroom. They sat on the dirty tiled floor, their heads bent low, their faces hidden by long, unkempt hair. The whispers continued, their voices low and frantic, as if they were engaged in some sort of ritual. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the sense of unease in the room was palpable. "Hey, what are you guys doing in here?" I called out, my voice trembling. The group fell silent, and then, as if on cue, they all turned to look at me. Their faces were a horrifying sight, pale and gaunt, their eyes wide and unblinking. It was as if they hadn't seen the light of day in years. One of them, a woman with matted hair, rose to her feet and took a step towards me. Her voice was a raspy whisper as she spoke. "We need to stay hidden," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. "They're out there, and they'll find us if we're not careful." I had no idea who they were or what she was talking about, but the fear in her eyes was genuine. I took a step back, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Should I try to get them to leave? Before I could make a decision, the lights in the restroom flickered and went out. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart pounding in the darkness. When I turned it on and shone it towards the restroom, it was empty. The group of people had vanished, as if they had never been there. I stood there, my flashlight trembling in my hand, the whispers now replaced by an eerie silence. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something otherworldly in that restroom. To this day, I have no idea who those people were or what they were so afraid of. But one thing was certain. That night shift at the petrol station had turned from mundane to utterly terrifying in the blink of an eye. Working the night shift at a quiet petrol station had always been a bit eerie. The dimly lit forecourt and the occasional distant hum of passing cars were my only companions during those long, lonely hours. Most nights, it was uneventful. Customers came and went, and I occupied myself with magazines and the occasional cup of lukewarm coffee. One chilly autumn night, however, everything changed. The clock had just struck midnight when a beat-up old sedan pulled into the forecourt. Its headlights cast eerie shadows on the ground as it parked near one of the pumps. I watched from behind the counter, anticipating another routine transaction. The driver's side door swung open, and a man stumbled out of the car. Even from a distance, I could tell something was off about him. He moved with an unsteady gait, his steps faltering as he approached the store. As he got closer, I noticed his disheveled appearance, unkempt hair, torn clothing, and a wild look in his eyes. The man reeked of alcohol, and it was clear he'd had more than his fair share. My instincts told me to be cautious, so I kept a close eye on him as he entered the store. He stumbled up to the counter, swaying slightly. His breath, a noxious mix of booze and who knows what else, washed over me as he mumbled something unintelligible. I strained to make out his words, realizing he was demanding cigarettes. I reluctantly fetched a pack of cigarettes, my unease growing with each passing second. I knew I had to be careful. This guy was unpredictable, and I didn't want to provoke him. I rang up the purchase, and he slapped a crumpled bill on the counter, far more than the cost of the cigarettes. I handed him his change, hoping he'd take it and leave, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned in closer, his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. His voice, now a low, menacing growl, pierced the silence of the store. He began muttering about conspiracies, aliens, and government cover-ups, his words coming faster and more incoherent with each passing second. I could feel my heart racing as I nodded along, trying to placate him, while also glancing towards the security button under the counter. If things escalated, I knew I had to act fast. But I also didn't want to trigger an even worse reaction from this man. Suddenly, he grabbed a handful of cigarettes and stuffed them into his pocket. Panic coursed through me as I watched him pocket the stolen goods. He was stealing, and I had to do something. But before I could react, he turned and stumbled back towards the door. I seized the opportunity to hit the security button, alerting the authorities. As the loud alarm blared through the store, the man lurched out the door and into his car. I watched from the safety of the store as he sped away into the night, leaving behind a trail of questions and a lingering sense of dread. The police arrived shortly after, taking my statement and reviewing the security footage. They assured me they'd keep an eye out for the man, but they also warned me to stay vigilant. This wasn't the kind of encounter you easily forget, and for weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped a much darker fate that night. As I continued my night shifts at the petrol station, I couldn't help but wonder about the man and what had driven him to that state of madness. I hoped I'd never have to encounter him again, but the memory of that night would forever serve as a reminder of the unpredictable and sometimes dangerous world that lurked beyond the store's dimly lit walls.